This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
What is that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You're crazy! Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Picardo. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 152 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, and the man that runs our Twitter page. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to a new month of reviews here at DCAU Review.
That's right, and we are returning to where it all began. So we are picking up with another month of Batman the Animated Series reviews, and we're starting it off with a very famous episode, and we're excited to see if it lives up to the hype. We're talking this week, The Man Who Killed Batman.
That's right. Another legendary, pretty high up on the list episode from my recollection of a lot of those lists that came out that actually inspired us to do our own version of this podcast back several years ago now. So very much looked forward to rewatching this one and checking to see whether or not it lived up to the hype. So we will get to that in just a moment. But before we do, as we always do each and every week, I know that you have the IMDb official synopsis for this week's episode, which, as you mentioned, The Man Who Killed Batman originally debuted, Liam, get this, back on February 1st, 1993, which means it just celebrated its 28th anniversary.
That's right. And I will get that synopsis for this episode. As you mentioned, The Man Who Killed Batman, which was written by Paul Dini, directed by Bruce Timm, with music by Shirley Walker and animation by Sunrise. And that synopsis reads as such. A small-time crook tells his story of how he accidentally seemed to kill Batman, and how now everyone wants to kill him next.
I don't like the choice of words for that one.
How now? Also, you mixed present and past tense in that sentence. So
clearly not an English major that wrote that one.
C minus.
All right, well, Liam, let's jump into our plot for this week's episode, as the IMDb official synopsis attempted to do so. So we have a Paul Dini written episode here. First and foremost, we need to get that out of the way, and directed by the legendary Bruce W. Timm. I don't know if he got the W in the credits for this one or not, but at the time, Bruce W. Timm, as he was known. And so we have here an episode that kicks off with a young man, or probably not a young man, a middle-aged man who is desperate to get in to see one Rupert Thorne, who, of course, we were introduced in a few past episodes, including Two-Face Parts 1 and 2, who, as we know, he is a crime boss of sorts. And this young man, Sidney, needs to get in to see Mr. Thorne because he has an urgent issue that he needs to address with crime boss Rupert Thorne.
Sidney Debris to see you, sir.
Send him in.
Mr. Thorne, I'm so grateful you're willing to see me on such short notice.
Nonsense, Sidney. Come in. Join me for a demi-tasse?
No, thank you, sir. Oh. Sorry about the leather.
I hear you've made quite a name for yourself on the street, Sidney. What is it they're calling you? Oh, yes. The man who killed Batman.
Oh, yes. No, that is, I didn't. Oh, Mr. Thorne, I'm in big trouble.
No, just relax, man. And tell me what's on your mind.
Yeah, this is it's kind of interesting framing device. As kind of simple and comedic as the basic plot is, that this goofy guy who's barely competent or well respected enough in the criminal underworld to even be a look. He seemingly has accidentally killed Batman, but they also tell it as sort of most of the episode is a flashback. As it starts with we see this this man running through the streets scared, and he comes into Rupert Thorne's house and begins to tell this story of how he just wanted to make a name for himself, and now he accidentally offs Batman after sort of bumbling himself into a struggle, and sort of gets this rep that he doesn't deserve and doesn't really want, and sort of put him in the path of not only every other sort of low-life thug Gotham, but also, as we see a little bit later on, some of the true baddest of the bad as far as super criminals go.
That's right. So he's out, and he mentions that he's trying. It's interesting. I thought it was funny that he openly admits he's trying to work his way up through this crime family and into the underbelly of Gotham. So he's out on this drug. They're on a drug run, and it sounds like off the bat that his fellow criminals on this are looking to kind of set him up as the patsy. There's an offhanded, backhanded comment about him being too busy dealing with Batman and as the lookout to kind of keep the heat off of these other three gentlemen that are with him. And wouldn't you know it, as Sid the Squid is up on the roof fantasizing about his recently given moniker of Sid the Squid and how his tentacles are going to reach throughout Gotham and the underbelly of Gotham, who happens to show up with the Dark Knight, and Batman sort of, I guess, maybe is a little bit off of his game, or just through some happenstance, as he kind of Sid the Squid ends up slipping on his own flashlight, which causes him to sort of lurch at Batman. Batman pushes him off and throws him to a giant television antenna that just happens to swing him around and sort of hit Batman back. And then he trips over, he being Sidney, trips over the edge of a building as he's backing up, and Batman goes to reach him. And in his panic, he drops his flashlight down, and it hits this what was it, a propane tank, I believe, or something like that, a giant propane tank, which causes it to start leaking. Batman is attempting to pull him up, and he's sort of pulling Batman down. It was akin to like when a child is struggling in the deep end of the pool and at the same time drowning the person that's trying to help them.
Don't let me fall, please.
Stop struggling. Let go.
I didn't mean it. He came right at me. I was just trying to get away, and he went over the side. Boom, whoosh, fired.
It was very, very eerily similar to that. And so through that, he sort of pulls Batman down, and by the cowl, removes Batman's cowl, and Batman falls seemingly to his doom all at once. Meanwhile, these other gentlemen that had seen Sidney sort of take on Batman and sort of from a distance believe that he was fighting Batman as opposed to this sort of haphazardly falling over himself bit. here's the giant explosion, and they go up to find Sidney clutching or Sidney comes down off the roof clutching Batman's cowl, saying that it was all an accident, much to the surprise of the rest of the gang.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a fun bit there. Is you see the explosion and then him holding the cape and cowl, and we'll certainly get more into that in visuals a little bit. But yeah, he's seemingly on top of the world for a moment. After that, they take him to the local dive bar to celebrate, and he's sitting on the chair with the cape and cowl draped over the chair behind him. It's quite funny, and then of course someone calls him the toughest man in Gotham, which of course ignites a bar brawl, which is a pretty fun little slapstick segment. And it's fascinating to me mostly about this story. Beyond kind of the quirky Paul Dini of it all, it's a very Dini script for obvious reasons. But what really just stood out to me is it's shocking to me that this pitch got to Fox Kids, and they did a bit where they're like, we're going to follow this like schlubby, nothing happening, goofy guy for 22 minutes. Batman's probably on screen for a combined, if you count the intro to the show and the static image of him that's over the end credits, he's maybe in the show for 3 minutes of the entire runtime. And that they were able to get that greenlit and bring out such a unique episode. But yeah, it's really, from I think just the way the story is told, to do this much of an episode, that just a Batman episode that doesn't feature Batman. Doesn't even really, I mean, obviously Batman's still central to the episode because, again, like we said, his killing, his quote unquote killing of Batman makes him a hero, and then also sort of puts him on the radar of every other thug, and in fact the Joker. And we also get to see Bullock and Montoya kind of finding out about this homicide that's come in, and they're reporting that Batman is dead. So even sort of the cops have gotten wind that he's gone, and that's sort of from there that leads Sidney right into the crosshairs of a lawyer named Arleen Quinzel, which I'm guessing at this point maybe they didn't know that was going to be her actual real name.
Yeah, I guess not.
Because she walks up and says, "My name's Arleen Quinzel," and they don't go, "Oh, the criminal Harley Quinn, you're under arrest."
Just 1 minute, please. I'm Arleen Quinzel, legal counsel to Mr. Debris. I've paid his bail, and he doesn't have to answer any questions until he's formally arraigned.
Don't I know you from someplace?
I think I served you a subpoena once. It was a small subpoena.
Right. So there is kind of a snide, there's a cute little bit of dialogue between her and Bullock, where Bullock kind of seems to recognize her. But I that just feels like something that's kind of retroactively, like she just introduces herself as her real legal name, and takes Sidney out of the holding cell and right into the lair of the Joker. I think, is this also the first appearance of the hyenas?
Bud and Lou? It may very, very. I'm trying to think.
Well, Harley's only been in 2, right? She was in almost, that we reviewed, at least in production order.
Correct.
That's tough to say again, because many episodes may have aired before this that we haven't covered because we're reviewing in production order. But Harley was in Joker's Favor, and then she's in Almost Got Him,
right?
And now this one, unless I'm forgetting one. But so yeah, I believe this would be the first appearance of the hyenas. They aren't named yet, and it isn't clear that they're actually Harley's pets just yet. But it was kind of cool to see. I had not remembered that they were in, or that, and then it sort of dawned on me. Not only are they in this, I think this is their first appearance.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good pull. Yeah, that we get the origins of Bud and Lou the hyenas. So from there we get the Joker approaches has brought Sydney to his hideout and is sort of talking to him about this and talking about the rumors that he's heard that Sid the Squid has offed the bat and he's going to put it to the test. So he sets up this heist that they're going to do. They're going to run a job and break into a jewelry store, and they do, waiting for Batman to arrive. And much to the Joker's surprise, despite the fact that he did not believe Sid's story, what do you know? Batman does not arrive to save the day. There's a funny interaction where Harley is wearing a bunch of stolen jewelry and comes up to the Joker and he tells her to put the jewelry back because it's just not the same without Batman.
Wee, look at all the pretties.
Put them back, Harley.
Oh, Mr. J, you're such a kidder. You never could...
I said put them back!
Sure, boss, I can do that. This is me putting them back, no problema.
Without Batman, crime has no punchline.
Which then leads to a trip to the Ace Chemical plant, which of course would later on make a reappearance in the Beware the Creeper episode. As we know, it is the DCAU origins of where the Joker became the Joker. And with that, the Joker decides to have an impromptu funeral, not for Batman, but for ultimately Sid himself.
Yes, it's an incredible scene. This is a scene, and we'll certainly talk about it more in acting specifically, but it's a pretty iconic scene, I think, in the series as the Joker discusses, the great pain that he feels knowing that he'll never get to be the one that kills Batman, that the hours he spent trying to pick the perfect death trap, how he was going to kill him, and then yes, it's sort of at the end there as he's trying to gain his composure and regain his happiness. He says he'll be smiling again when once they have offed Sydney, so they lock him in a coffin, send him down a conveyor belt into a bunch of acid. At the time, Sid thinks he just was lucky and must have washed out of a drain pipe, and that's how he survived. But as we sort of begin to wrap up plot here, as he's recounting the end of the story, Rupert Thorne is getting angry and angrier at him, and refuses to believe that this guy could be this stupid and or lucky, and pulls a gun on him, thinks he must be trying to muscle in on Thorne's turf. And that is, of course, when we reveal that Batman is in fact alive and has sort of been using the cover of his apparent death to sort of shadow Sydney and sort of cleaning up his messes as he goes along, and gives Rupert Thorne a good thrashing, both for pulling the gun and also for apparently being the mastermind behind the original drug deal that was going down at the docks that sort of kicked the whole episode off. So it's a fun little ending, but yeah, it is really just a fascinating, quirky, funny Paul Dini tale that mostly doesn't feature Batman.
Yeah, we've talked to, honestly, this seems to be a theme that we've really, really enjoyed. And we can get ready to get into our scores here for the plot. Some of the best episodes that we've covered so far have been episodes that have featured heavily on something other than Batman himself. A lack of Batman does not equal a bad episode. And it's interesting because maybe as a child, it wasn't one of your favorite episodes. And I don't remember necessarily loving or hating this episode. I don't think that it's one that we necessarily had. I don't think we if we did have this on videotape at some point, it wasn't one that we watched very often from my recollection. it still feels very familiar because of the amount of times probably seeing it in reruns, and then again when it came out on DVD. But with that said, a lack of Batman, as we've established, does not equal a bad episode. In fact, sometimes I think we could pretty much say at this point, for the majority of the time, a lack of Batman usually means a very well-written episode that has to be more focused and relied on the actual story itself driving it, which kind of makes for more of an interesting episode to watch, as opposed to Batman punching and kicking, or, Batman kind of, figuring the plot out, whether it makes sense for him to have figured it out or not.
Yeah, no, I think it works great because you still show Batman a capable, smart guy by the end, as he's, again, sort of solved the calamity, and that people started to believe that he was dead, and sort of used that to sort of silently move through the criminal underworld to get to Thorne. I thought that was actually a pretty clever way. So you still show off the clever nature of Batman and his ability to use even seemingly his own death to his advantage. But yes, it also gives you a vehicle to explore. And it also kind of, I think, shows, whereas most of the criminals are so happy that Batman's dead and that they're all going to kind of catch a break, they think. Whereas, again, it's, even though he's not a major part of this episode, the couple of scenes with the Joker and focusing in on that relationship, which I think has been explored quite a bit, especially in more recent years, and in the Heath Ledger Batman movie, and in a lot of comic books, even in the Lego Batman movie, and sort of Joker's need for Batman, and certainly there's some iconic lines that we'll talk about in voice acting, but I altogether I really enjoyed this episode. I ended up with a 9 out of 10 for plot. I really enjoyed it, and it's Sid the Squid's a pretty fun character, and again, taking a character, not only not using Batman, but having our main sort of pilot throughout the whole episode being a character we've never seen before. It's not Alfred or Robin or even Commissioner Gordon or somebody, where this low life thug we've never met before this episode, and kind of having him be the focus and having it still be so fun and interesting as an episode was no small feat, and that's certainly reflected in my score.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's as advertised to me. I think there's a reason why this episode consistently shows up on so many people's lists of being the best of the best. It's just done so well. And like I just kind of stumbled through there, the idea that not having Batman very much in the entirety of the runtime, I think in the 22-minute episode, I think it's probably less than 2 minutes that Batman is on screen. So for that to be done, and for it to be so story and plot driven, and it's a good plot, and you work some humor in there, and you get some of the great Paul Dini writing. It's amazing. We talked about it when we reviewed Mixius Pixelated a few months back, that these stories, these somewhat dark humor and the comedic underlying, sometimes zany stories, all came out of the same brain as the same person that wrote, Mad Love and Heart of Ice, and some of those darker, more introspective tales. It just speaks to just the amazing writing ability of Mr. Dini, and why to this day he's still writing comic books and writing great stories. So for that reason, I really enjoyed this episode. I think from start to finish, it's done so well. The surprise, I mean, obviously we have the benefit of the hindsight of knowing that Batman isn't dead, but imagine watching this as a child for the first time and you actually think that Batman is dead. Like, it's pretty traumatizing. It's pretty, but the fact that Batman shows up right at the end, the reveal is done so perfectly. They didn't really telegraph it for the most part. Done really, really well. So I felt like I had no choice but to give this a perfect 10 out of 10.
There you go.
All right, Liam. So let's move on to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. There were a few standout moments in this episode that we can talk about for me, but I will let you kick things off here with what you had as far as notes for animation and visuals.
Yeah, so it's not an action heavy plot as mentioned. It's much more focused on the I think the voice acting and the writing are sort of what really shine here. But again, episode directed by Bruce Timm and with animation by Sunrise. Sunrise is kind of that weird little subsidiary studio of one of the bigger ones. Kevin Altieri, the director on this series, who was on our review of Off Balance, mentioned that they were a very inexperienced studio when it came to this type of animation, and they were sort of learning as they went with a lot of it. And I don't think everything's a home run. I think especially the Joker design is pretty inconsistent, which we've talked about before. That's not a problem exclusive to this animation department, but there's definitely some inconsistencies. And like I said, it's not an action heavy episode, but what visuals are good or that stuck out to me that are good are really good. And I enjoyed especially as we said, the Joker scene is there throwing Sidney into the coffin and locking him down, and Harley is playing the kazoo. She's playing the old gospel hymn "Amazing Grace" on the kazoo as the casket is slowly rolling down the conveyor belt towards the acid, and we even see like a single tear drop down the Joker's face, and which of course is that whole bit is a bit of an homage to the end of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Spoiler alert: Spock dies at the end of that one, and spoiler.
Oh man, I hadn't seen that movie that came out 40 years ago.
Well, yes, I know. This would be the place you would think you were safe from Star Trek spoilers. But no, even here, you'll get them occasionally. When I recognize one of the few Star Trek things I know, I'm gonna mention it. That was probably the standout visual. That and a little bit at the end there when Batman uses his, instead of the Batarang, we have the shuriken, the throwing star, and when he throw that, and again we kind of follow it across the screen, and then it lands right in the tip of Thorne's gun. I thought that was a clever visual as well.
Yeah, the things that I totally agree with you. This wasn't one that was completely relied upon, as we just talked about. It was very plot heavy, very story heavy. I thought Sid the Squid looked a little bit like he gave me some Rick Moranis vibes a little bit. Like if this was a live action movie, Rick Moranis would have played him
100%.
I think it's the glasses and maybe like the face shape would have been a Rick Moranis casting on my side of things. In addition to that, most of the stuff that I had written down as far as visuals, there was some really great shadow work, I thought, in a pair of back-to-back scenes, and that's as the lawyer Arleen Quinzel picks up Sid and bails him out of jail, and then they get into the back of a limousine, and she's you kind of get this shot over her shoulder looking right at Sid, and he's kind of disheveled by the amount of perfume and makeup that seems to be flowing through the air, and it cuts back and there's heavy shadow over Harley, and cuts back to her sort of starting to put the Harley mask on and the Harley hood on, and then the shadow kind of reveals her face, and then the very next scene is cuts to the Joker sitting on this really unique looking throne. It's like his face with hands and cards sticking out of it. They had a lot of fun with drawing this particular scene for the Joker. I always like those backgrounds and those unique setups. I got to wonder, like, did the Joker pay somebody to make this custom throne for him, you think? Does he have a throne guy?
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine there's somebody building all these props and stuff for all these guys. Like, like there's a guy who's like sewing suits, like half of a white suit and half a black suit together. There's like a tailor guy who makes everybody's clothes, and then you gotta have like a giant like hideout prop guy, because in the one episode he has like the curtain with his face on it and like a like a Joker phone and all this stuff. So yeah, he's got to have like, there's got to be like a few guys in Gotham that could probably be its own comic or its own series. Just like all the different like side hustle criminals who are just make different props or clothing or weapons for other villains,
manufacturing branded material for each villain. I think we're onto something here with all the streaming services needing all of their content here. Let's come up with a show about a guy whose job it is to make all the branded content for the villains. But anyway, so that on that scene, as the Joker gets up, there's sort of you clearly it's the Joker, but there's sort of this slow reveal of the shadow over his face, and he's kind of half in shadow as he begins talking to Sid. And
my boss likes me to wear a smile to work.
Hey, I've seen you. You work for the Joker.
Welcome, Sydney. Please allow me the honor of shaking hands with the man who did the impossible. The man who killed Batman. Whoops! Sorry, force of habit.
It's really, really done really, really well. I really appreciated the shadows there. As you noted, there is definitely some inconsistency in how the Joker is portrayed, but that's, as we've talked about throughout these initial episodes, that was something that was pretty standard. I did happen to notice as I was watching, especially the funeral scene itself, a lot of the visuals looked like Bruce Timm storyboards. It was interesting. You could pick it out. Just like, oh yeah, that looks exactly like a Bruce Timm drawing of the Joker. And sure enough, when we did the research, we saw that he was responsible for storyboarding some of this episode. So for me, I thought that, well, if Bruce Timm is the standard by which this show is supposed to be animated, and these storyboards that he did ultimately turned into the visuals for the episode that ended up being pretty true to his art style, I have to give it pretty high marks for that. On top of that, I think that final scene as Batman bursts through the door, you hear Sid and Thorne pulls the gun on Sid like he's going to kill him, and you hear the gunshots go off, and Sid is like checking his body for bullet holes in a very cartoon way. And then Batman bursts through the door. You get this crescendo of music. He just sort of nonchalantly starts strutting towards Thorne, who has pulled this gun. There's a cut to Thorne with the gun drawn really wide in this very dynamic pose. Batman then, as you said, hurls the throwing star just very nonchalantly at the gun, a perfect bullseye right down the barrel. Followed by some knife roughhousing and even an off-screen punch that leaves Rupert Thorne dazed and landing with his chin right on the desk. Really, that whole sequence was done really, really well. I loved it. I think I literally like scared my dog standing up and cheering here as I rewatched that scene for the first time in a while.
You're trying to muscle in on my drug racket. You've been playing dumb so you can get a shot at me.
No, really.
Sure, I'll get you out of Gotham, Sydney, in a pine box.
That's for pulling a gun. And that's for the drugs. And that one's for any I missed.
But there was, as you mentioned, some inconsistencies. There were some inconsistencies with Rupert Thorne. Sometimes he had whites behind his eyes. Sometimes he didn't have whites behind his eyes. At one point, they cut to him and he had white eyebrows as opposed to the black eyebrows. So there was some inconsistency in the visuals. And I was even watching the new remastered versions of the episodes. So this is something they didn't even go back and correct in those or were unable to correct in those. So all of that said, this isn't an episode that highly that relies on those visuals, and because of that, because of some of the inconsistencies, it brought my score down a little bit. But still, I ended up giving it a very high score of 8 out of 10. What about you?
Nice, yeah, I'm just a tick lower. I went 7 out of 10. Definitely a lot of good there, despite some flaws, and like we said, sort of an inexperienced animation studio in Sunrise. I think this was if this was a TMS episode, we might be a little bit higher than we are, but definitely still some great stuff, especially that shadow work.
Agreed. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which will be music. And thankfully, we have the ability to listen to this soundtrack in isolation, thanks to the fine folks at Warner Brothers releasing the entirety of the Batman the Animated Series soundtrack on streaming services and CD at one point. So let's talk about this week's soundtrack.
Yeah, so we have Shirley Walker providing the music this week, and there's some really, really interesting stuff. I think the biggest, most obvious thing is it's actually right in the title sequence, and then doesn't really get brought back until Batman reappears at the end. But I think what struck out to me is there's a lot of organ in this episode.
Yes.
That stood out to me. Like I said, it's not overused, but it is used, and it's very noticeable because it's just not one of the usual things. Obviously, with Batman the Animated Series, it's mostly strings and horns and that sort of thing, light percussion. You don't usually hear something that sort of ear catching, for lack of a better term, as that organ. But I enjoyed it for what it's worth.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really strong. I think that the scene with Sid and Batman on the rooftop has some great background music and some tension building music as this bumbling idiot sort of fumbles through this interaction, and they keep cutting back and forth between the other thugs and Batman on the roof with Sid. There, of course, as you said, the scene with the Joker that is very much over the top. The music that swells behind it as the Joker is delivering this perfect eulogy for Batman, sort of, but actually really a eulogy for Sid himself, is done so well. And then again, as I just said, that final scene as Batman bursts into Rupert Thorne's office, is the music just crescendos, and the Shirley Walker Batman theme comes through with this driving organ. It gave me chills. Really, really, really strong. And for that scene alone, I ended up giving music a 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I actually gave it the exact same score. I gave it an 8 out of 10 as well.
Nice. All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final category for today, and that is going to be voice acting. Not a huge cast, but we do have some returning favorites and the who's who, I would dare say, of Batman the Animated Series voices, at least, as we discuss our voice actors for today.
Yeah, that's right. So first and foremost, we have Max Brewer playing Sid the Squid. Max, who would be known from a television series called Max Headroom, which I've never heard of, but it made me laugh. And he's shown up in other shows playing this character, so very memorable. Apparently, it was very memorable to certain writers of a certain age, I guess.
Okay.
He also voiced the leader on the Incredible Hulk cartoon of the 90s. So
okay,
little Marvel crossover there. But yeah, I think he's very funny. He's a funny character. He's meant to be silly character, and I think I think he pulls that off pretty well.
Yeah, he's a goofy, nervous, bumbling idiot, and which is interesting because contrasting that, the leader on the Incredible Hulk is the opposite of that. So, a very interesting choice for them to eventually cast that guy as the strong, smart leader character on that show. But I dare say that he plays the character as a bumbling idiot. I believed him to be a bumbling idiot. I think he was perfectly cast.
Yeah, I thought he did a great job. We have John Vernon returning as Rupert Thorne. Very good, slimy mob boss type character, and good to see him back in. He's of some of these kind of ancillary guys we just see a few times. I've always really enjoyed this character for whatever reason, so it was cool to see him back. We also had Robert Picardo, who, again, another guy who he was on a different Star Trek show, and I don't have any spoilers about that one. But he also, of course, voiced Amazo later on in Justice League. So he's playing one of the thugs, and Maurice LaMarche, who would probably be known as the voice of the Brain on Pinky and the Brain, played one of the other thugs. So some fun little voice cameos in there, and some of the smaller roles as well. And then, of course, we have Ingrid Oliu returning as Renee Montoya. We have briefly Robert Costanza as Harvey Bullock, and then despite only being in it for a couple of scenes, probably not surprising, Mark Hamill's Joker and Arleen Sorkin as Harley pretty much steal the show in this one.
Dear friends, today is the day the clown cried. And he cries not for the passing of one man, but for the death of a dream. The dream that he would someday taste the ultimate victory over his hated enemy. For it was the Batman who made me the happy soul I am today. How I agonized over the perfect way to thank him for that. Perhaps with a cyanide pie in the face. Or an exploding whoopee cushion playfully planted in the Batmobile. But those dreams were dashed by the Weasley little gunsel sitting there in our midst. The cowardly, insignificant Garnet who probably got lucky when Batman slipped on the slime trail this loser left behind him. This mound of diseased hyena filth who's not fit to lick the dirt from my spats. But I digress. The time for sorrow has passed. It's time to look ahead to a future filled with smiles. And I'll be smiling again, just as soon as we take that man there, and slap him in that box there, and roll it into that vat of acid there.
No, I never meant to do it. Help! This isn't funny anymore. Would it help if I said I'm sorry? I'm really sorry.
Well, that was fun. Who's for Chinese?
Yeah, they're incredible. I think I believe as we were preparing for this week, and I think you were even talking about it on Twitter, which you can follow us on Twitter at DCAUreview.com, where you're over there talking with all of our followers and other DCAU fans, and we were talking about how this whole monologue is one of if not Mark Hamill's favorite bits from the entirety of the Batman the Animated Series run.
Yeah, it's one that he's like re-performed or performed verbatim at a couple different sort of live Q&A functions at Comic Cons and even a Star Wars celebration a few years ago, and sort of one of the ones that he talks about when he talks about sort of his favorite memories of playing the Joker. This is sort of the one that sticks out to him, and specifically, he always talks about the line that the Joker says when is resigned to the fact that Batman isn't coming to stop this jewelry heist, and he, when he says without Batman, crime has no punchline, and that's always been one of apparently one of Mark Hamill's favorite lines, and it is I think it's deservedly iconic for this series as sort of one of the great lines, and following that up with the ridiculous sort of melodramatic, over the top ways in which he talks about wanting to have killed Batman himself and all of that, and then leading that to him capping it all off after throwing him in the casket with "That was fun. Who's for Chinese?" is pretty incredible, and it's just one of those things that feels very classic to really any era or any version of the Joker, but especially to this DCAU version.
Yes, and that coupled, of course, with Arleen Sorkin as Harley, and her, as I already mentioned, their interaction at the jewelry store, her bawling and wailing as the Joker delivers his eulogy for Batman. It's just so good. Yeah, and we would be remiss not to mention also that kazoo is actually Arleen Sorkin playing. Yes, I think there was a famous commentary from Paul Dini himself, who mentioned that she did it in one take, and they were glad that she was able to do it in one take because they were all laughing so incredibly hard in the studio that they felt like they wouldn't be able to get through a second take once she was finished. So it is quite memorable and fantastic. She's really good.
Absolutely. And then, of course, just briefly and very briefly in this week's episode, we have, of course, Kevin Conroy as Batman. For all the reasons we've just talked about, again, I think anchored by the Max Brewer Sid performance, but with greats like John Vernon and Mark Hamill and Arleen Sorkin around him, and a little bit of Kevin Conroy as well at the end. I had almost no choice but to give this a perfect 10 out of 10 for my voice acting score.
Nice. Kevin Conroy's lines, especially the last ones that he delivers, again, as he bursts through that door, that's for pulling the gun, that's for the drug bust, or for the drug run, and then his final one, and that's for anything else that I missed. Really, really, really strong. Just delivered so well, so Batman. Not as iconic as I Am Vengeance, I Am the Night, but super strong. Really, really, really good.
And even that little interaction between him and Sid, as Sid sort of tries to skip out at the end there, and Batman reminds him that he's still an accomplice to drug trafficking, and that he's still going to jail. And that is our little epilogue to the story, as we see Sid being let into jail, as all the inmates cheer him on, who apparently haven't been made aware yet that Batman is in fact still alive. So
I don't know. In the right environment, a man of your dangerous reputation could still get a lot of respect.
Here he comes.
It's the Squid. Caught this man in Gotham nearly off the bat.
Set Thorne up. You made a fool out of the Joker.
Don't mess with him, man. A big shot at last.
He sort of gets his infamy that he always wanted, and even as he's going to jail, he's kind of happy.
Yeah, and he actually ends up showing up. I mean, obviously the canonicity is certainly debatable, but he ended up showing up recently in the Batman The Adventures Continue comic, which you can hear our review of each of those comics in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app on our bonus episodes. So those comics also happen to be written by one Paul Dini, or co-written by Mr. Paul Dini. So it's interesting that he really appreciated, identified that with that character enough to bring him back in his comic later on. For all the reasons that we just talked about, I also had no choice but to give voice acting a perfect 10 out of 10.
Very nice.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for this week's episode. What do you know? Haven't heard that in quite a while.
It was gathering a little dust. Just had to make sure it still worked.
That, of course, being the bonus point sound. Liam, I'm going to guess that means that you, my friend, have a bonus point.
That's right. And this one is solely for the title card for the episode. As we've talked about, Eric Radomski, the co-creator, co-showrunner of the series, drew all of these title cards for the series. And this one, I just remember looking at it. There's a page in the sadly out of print now, but the great Batman animated book that was actually written by Paul Dini, funny enough, that had a bunch of behind the scenes stories and promo art and production art and all this stuff. And there's a page with just a bunch of the title cards on them. And I just always remember, even as like a small, as a kid, kind of when I probably wasn't actually reading the book and I was just looking at the pictures of the toys and the art and all of that, seeing that title card and being so like transfixed by it. Cause it's just this little, just mostly black with the words, "The man who killed Batman," and then the small image of Sid the Squid. And you just kind of see the rims of his glasses lit up enough to see that it's a person. And it's such a fantastic, striking visual. And it's just, for whatever reason, I can't even quite put my finger on why to this date, but it's one of the title cards that has stuck with me more than any other when it comes to this series.
That's a good one. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the title cards, how great they are, and you're right. This one is definitely one of the ones that sticks out just for the big, bold words emblazoned at the start. What a way to kick it off! The man who killed Batman, and just this little, as you said, this little tiny, almost like a Peanuts-looking style drawn character with these giant doe eyes in dark shadow, and then of course revealed to be this unassuming, bumbling idiot. So that's a great bonus point. I love that. All right, Liam. So that will bring us to our final scores for this week's episode. Totaling everything up, I end up with a impressive 36 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and I am just one tick lower on my score with a 35 out of 40.
Man, just outside the top picks category for both of us there. Maybe the next time we do a review episode, as we did recently on our 150th episode, or maybe if we decide at some point next year to posthumously induct some of our deserving picks into that top pick section, this will be one of those considered, which, by the way, we did have a poll up on our Twitter page just a few weeks ago, Liam, where we invited our listeners to vote for a induction into that top pick section. We had each given an episode for that poll, and I believe we have a winner.
That's right. And thanks again to everyone for voting. Had some fun conversations and a lot of nice feedback and well wishes from people on that 150th episode. And we had a lot of fun putting it together. It was certainly our longest episode yet, and people seem to not mind that. And we appreciate that. Appreciate anyone that would listen to us talk about that stuff. Had a lot of fun putting it together. But yes, as the results of the poll, as we mentioned, we each put up an episode with our Twitter friends and our listeners being able to choose the winner. And that winner is, in fact, the Batman the Animated Series episode POV.
So if you recall, that episode was our first double feature that we did. It also featured the very first bad episode that went into our bad episode jar. So it has the distinction of being both simultaneously one of our worst picks and our top picks, both on the same episode. So you can check out that episode in the archives at DCAUreview.com, as we covered both the Underdwellers and POV on the same episode. So you can go back.
Peaks and valleys, man. Peaks and valleys.
The yin and yang of Batman the Animated Series. But yes, lots of fun with that. And if you didn't check out that 150th episode, go back in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app and check that out. We did have a lot of fun with that. Lots of fun things talked about in the episodes that we've covered thus far on the program. But Liam, we are still rolling here with a month of Batman the Animated Series episodes, which means that we have yet another episode coming up next week. Why don't you inform the listeners at home which episode we'll be covering next week?
That's right. And we got another banger of an episode to talk about this week with the return of probably one of the most visually interesting villains in all of the Batman mythos. That is the return of Clayface in the episode Mudslide.
Oh boy, looking forward to that one. That should be a great one as we revisit Matt Hagen and co. Don't forget, folks, thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like us, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app if it allows it. If not, you can share our episodes, tell your friends about the show. We really appreciate that. Don't forget, if you want to support the podcast, you can head over to DCAUreview.com, click on the store tab at the top and buy yourself a shirt, a hat, a mug, a sticker, something to support the pod since we don't run ads here. Don't forget, we are also proudly a part of the Pod Tower on YouTube. So if you consume, or if you know somebody that consumes their podcasts on YouTube, tell them to head over to the Pod Tower and check us out there, where full episodes can be found. Also, alongside us are the guys from Tim Talk and our good friends at the Watchtower Database, putting stuff up there on that same channel. So if you subscribe to that channel, it helps us out, it helps those guys out, and you get your content delivered all in one spot. Looking forward to tackling Mudslide next week with you, Liam. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU.
Adios.